They use 40% of the world's energy, emit 50% of its greenhouse gases. They are not the cars we drive. They are the buildings where we work, live, and grow. Buildings designed with an unconscious disregard for nature. Adopting sustainable alternatives is not only a matter of progress, it's a matter of survival. Design E squared, the economies of being environmentally conscious. What does it mean to be environmentally conscious today? To recycle your newspapers, bottles and cans? Sure. But what about massive construction materials designed for a single purpose? What happens when the job is done? With construction waste consuming 25% of our landfills, is there not a better way to adapt and reuse our engineering marvels? Perhaps the way we think is what needs to be discarded.
Well, the Big Dig was an idea that was hatched back in the early 1980s. The idea was that the elevated central artery, which was built in the 1950s and wound its way through the heart of downtown Boston, was getting old, it was falling apart, and it was overburdened with traffic. So what to do with it? Well, you could rebuild it, or you could put it underground. So that was the basic idea. Put it underground and demolish the elevated artery and put parks and development and new public space there.
This job wasn't just a tunnel. It was building a tunnel through the most densely populated part of Boston, certainly the most valuable real estate in Boston, doing it through corridors of utilities that are mind-boggling, doing it at the same time using the structural elements of the new tunnel to hold up the old elevated highways as it was still being used above. It was an incredible task.
Now, 20 years later, it went from an original price tag of about $2.8 billion to the current $14.6 billion. So it became a very expensive project to build, and there's a lot of cynicism because of the problems, because it took so long and it cost more than they said it was going to.
I think the Big Dig started off with a bang, and the enthusiasm for the project has waned the last few years, but we're really in the finishing stages now, and I think the enduring legacy of the Big Dig, we're already seeing it in that it's improved transportation in the city, I think dramatically, at least from my perspective. And once the parks are open and the green spaces have been completed, I think the whole affinity for the Big Dig will become much stronger.
Years from now, when that greenway is finished, I think it's going to be pretty inspiring, and Boston is going to be a really special place with that kind of public space and park. But was that worth $14 billion?
Not to mention the waste from demolished buildings, bridges, and temporary highways. The dismantled central artery produced 20,000 tons of concrete and more than 38,000 tons of steel. Who on earth would find this inspiring?
I've been on the project for 11 years, so my job actually changed over the course of that time. I started out as a project manager running a single project, which was one of the first tunnel sections. But over the last 8 or 9 years, I've been a vice president of one of the major construction companies in the project. Well, anytime your project is a federally funded transportation project, there's certain standards that have to be met. Obviously, if it's going to be a bridge, it's going to carry passengers every day. It has to be the best there is. And the scrutiny that the materials receive when they're being manufactured is it's so intense that it guarantees it's the best material you can buy. That's all the more reason that it should be available for reuse, because it's great stuff, and it's built to last a long time. These slabs are Inverset slabs. They're specially fabricated for use in temporary structures. When you want to build a bridge quickly, you incorporate the steel beams into the pouring of these concrete slabs, and they could be assembled in short order when you want to build a temporary structure like the ones we use in the Central Artery. They suggested that we take the last 40 or 50 panels and break them up, basically crush them up and destroy them. And I asked if we could take possession of them rather than get paid to crush them up. And the state agreed, and they asked me in the meeting, what are you going to do with the last few panels? And I told them I was going to build a house, and everybody in the room started laughing. But I wasn't. I was serious, and the design of the house started to take shape that day. I knew that I needed someone with an eye to help put together, especially the exterior, and help me with the layout. And I really wasn't looking for the architect when I found him. I was looking for a piece of land. I'd pick a spot of town and I'd run up and down the streets just looking for a vacant lot or a for sale sign. And I was running through Cambridgeport one day, and I turned the corner and I saw this fantastic minimalist house. I mean, it was just something you don't see in Cambridge very often. So I saw the name on the sign out front, and when I got home I emailed Single Speed Design. I referred to it as Junkyard Wars meets Habitat for Humanity. And when he first read it, he thought it was a prank, and I think he was a little bit tentative on responding, but he eventually did, and I invited him down to my office. And we went for a walk through the junk pile.
He did invite us over to see the stuff, junk that he calls it. He said he's a professional junk collector. I mean, it was definitely piles of steel and concrete that were formless at that point, and they're obviously dismantled. And it was fun looking at things, and he was very well versed in their technical abilities. Like, this beam can span this amount of distance, this slab can hold this much. So it was actually very exciting to not see this stuff as junk, but to see it as potential.
We asked Paul can you put this thing in the top, or how much this thing can support, and it's a simultaneous like a brainstorming.
The potential of 2-ton concrete slabs and massive structural steel beams, once considered waste, quickly became a thing of beauty. Or so they thought.
The only people that seemed excited about it was Paul and us.
Yeah, because we showed many people, because we were excited about it. But then the reaction was just pure skepticism.
The thing that struck me was when I was dealing with the financial institutions, when I first went for a loan, they were only willing to give me half of what I ultimately received because they doubted the marketability of this type of a house. They were nervous about the contemporary look of it to begin with, but when I mentioned that it was going to be built from recycled materials, their interest levels just went right down.
Real estate people say you should never be the first guy on the block, in terms of renovating or starting a new idea. But architects who innovate, they're always the first guy on the block. They're always the early proposers and early adapters. And they suffer, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune as a result. But they're dogged, too. They're on a mission.
So I redoubled my efforts on finding real estate. And we were lucky. We stumbled in on a piece where the house is located right now. And here, we were lucky enough that not only was a contemporary, not something that was against the local aesthetic, there was a covenant on the site, on the parcel of land, which dictated that a contemporary had to be built. So we were really happy. We moved pretty quickly on it.
Six Moon Hill is a neighborhood created in 1947, dedicated to modernist ideals. The question is, do those ideals still invite innovation and boldness?
What you've got is A small group of people who trained with Walter Gropius, who went into a neighborhood, got some land, and said, we really want to make not a house, but a neighborhood, and that's going to be a model for a way to live. And in this way, it harkens both to very profound and deep threads in American culture that have to do with utopianism.
I went for an individual meeting with the then chairman of the Moon Hill community, Dick Morehouse, and he was really a wonderful man, and he brought me in his house, and he looked at the plans, and as a professional architect who designed his own Moon Hill house, after looking at the plans, he said, that's lovely, and I'm very excited, but you'll never build that here in a million years. So we took that as a no, and we went back to the drawing board, and we tried to look at what they would want, as we thought, what were the elements of the Bauhaus that they would want us to replicate.
They wanted us to actually follow the 40s and 50s aesthetic, and the only exposed structure they wanted us to show were 6-inch round metal columns. We don't have any of those in our building, so that was it.
We decided we're not going to give up. We'll go back and we'll change it. In fact, John and Ginny, I believe, came up and drove around the neighborhood and picked off key aesthetic features of the other houses and came back with a design that was eventually accepted.
Structurally, I think we did push the envelope as much as we could. One of the things that we were free to do on this house was that the exterior wall doesn't have to bear any weight, because the weight is, of course, the highway pieces on the columns. So there was a lot of freedom in the exterior way we made openings.
The thing that I wanted to do with the house, and I think John and Ginny and eventually Christina all agreed on, was that we would try to make as big a space as we could. We really wanted to try to utilize the materials, the best characteristics of the materials, which allow you to do big open spaces.
So we want to bring in like airy feeling inside, and the site is really well preserved actually. So and there's many big trees, the site, and pretty beautiful surroundings. So we want to bring the nature inside, so we put a big like windows.
This beam was originally one of the struts that when we tunneled through downtown Boston, we put structural walls in, but in order to avoid settlement outside the tunnel, which was a critical concern considering the fact that the adjacent structures were historical, we had to install internal braces to keep the walls from moving in. And these beams, used in pairs, laced together, were the struts for the tunnel. So we have this point where the beam runs through the wall. Obviously, it gets pretty cold in these parts, and outside the steel's going to cool down. We were afraid of the cold intruding right through the steel. So we tried to focus on heating the steel right at the wall interface, and that's what you can see with these raised panels on the webs. Behind those panels are loops of the radiant system that's also in the floors, and when the temperature outside gets below 40 degrees, there's a discrete circuit that turns on, and it pushes hot water through those loops and it heats the end of the steel beams.
It was kind of a technical hurdle that we had to clear that became a kind of nice feature as well. Since the beams will hold and heat energy for a long period of time.
Due to the unique materials used for this size house, innovative solutions were a necessity. The beams not only hold up the structure and define its style, but heat the house as well.
When we built the house, we had the entire steel support system built in a day, and we took 13 of these slabs, and they became the floor of the house, and it took us 2 days to assemble those. So the whole house, the whole structure was basically complete in 3 days. We supersized the foundations to 4 foot square, and they go down and they sit on a slab of concrete that's 8 foot square and 2 foot thick, and that's sitting on solid rock. So there's zero chance that this house is going to settle. But it's a heck of a lot of weight. We calculate it to be about 500 tons, so it's about 1 million pounds. Well, my wife, Christina, is a water resources engineer, and as such, one of her main focuses was to reclaim water. And we have the Japanese garden on the roof of the garage. We thought that it would be best to collect the water from that garden.
You put any waterproofing layer, as in any other roof, because you don't want to have leaks. But then, before putting your soil, you have to put a drainage layer that also filters the water, so it doesn't contain any type of suspended particles on it. And that water goes into a cistern, and then you just have to pump it back.
He's reinventing this Bauhaus idea, this American utopian idea, by using discarded highway parts. And I think that's what's so wonderful about this project, and the projects that are supposed to come out of it, is that it's wonderfully fresh thinking, it's adventuresome thinking, and it's both tied to modernism's roots. At the same time, it very much looks to the future.
I think we fit in. We push the boundaries, obviously, a lot. We have the steel showing outside the house, and those were things that I think made certain people nervous in the beginning. But now that people have become used to it, it's now the sort of the feature of the house that people tend to notice.
Right now, I think we're level of not tolerance, but as soon as we have a bathroom done, I'll be ready. Boom, I'll move in.
I'm really liking the way it looks now, and I'll be a heck of a lot more happy when I'm shooting pool in the kitchen in a couple months.
So much of smart growth and sustainable development is just about models and successful models, and then people can look at it and say, hey, that's pretty neat, that makes a lot of sense, and the next project is easier to do because of that. And that happens a lot in smart growth and green building, where it takes one project to sort of break the ice, and then after that it becomes suddenly more acceptable and indeed sought after.
A couple of the neighbors were a little bit reserved in their comments, especially in the beginning, when it was big and ugly and it was a lot of steel and concrete showing, but they've all been incredibly supportive. But what's interesting to me is that a couple of the neighbors have actually come forth and asked if we could give them prices to build them a house. And I think that's undoubtedly the best flattery one can get on a house like this. And we hope to do a much larger commercial project. And I think that's when the real notoriety will come.
What are the possibilities for other discarded freeways, old bridges, and demolished overpasses? Is there a second life out there waiting for them? Will we be smart enough to recognize it?
Metropolis started the Next Generation Design Competition in 2004, and John and Ginny Hong from Single Speed Design entered a housing project, actually a housing development, which is multiple housing, based on the raw materials that they have mined from the Big Dig. The judges were saying that if we're going to talk about sustainability, we're going to have to also think about tighter development. So their Single Speed's proposal, reusing the structure of some of the structure of the Big Dig and making it in a beautiful housing, which is, by the way, extremely beautiful. And that was so compelling to everyone that they just swept over every other project. And then so they won the $10,000 prize of that Metropolis offers to develop a big idea.
It was a kind of public recognition, finally, that the idea was possibly legitimate, was possibly a good idea. Once you get larger in scale, it's that much more simpler to assemble it. You save that much more time, labor, and materials. If you fit the pieces in their most natural way, it's basically rebuilding the highway. It's kind of that was one of the revelations, I think, in the project. We were trying to do so many things with it, and then we admitted, this thing is a highway. Let's just assemble it. And all of a sudden, it was curved, it was elegant.
We want to kind of celebrate the materials, and we want to express the beauty of the material too.
So it's not just about recycling our cans and bottles, even our old highways. It's about recycling the way we think, taking our old ideas and giving them new life, and tapping into possibilities that are limitless.
I think the idea is growing, and people are looking at this as a very interesting solution to the garbage problem, the construction garbage problem. I mean, it's a huge issue. And when we stop labeling it and just do it and call it architecture or call it really good design, then I think we have achieved something.
When they built the temporary bridges on the artery with these structures, they did so with the purpose of disassembling them. It will be quick to take them apart. There's no reason why any structure of this type, anywhere in the country in the future, can't be built in the same fashion. There should be a mandate that any temporary structure would be designed with materials that could be easily reused. And if I could take it apart as easily as these slabs were taken apart, throw them in a truck and take them to another place, there's no end to that cycle. I mean, because these materials will last hundreds of years if they're properly maintained. But it's usually because it's too big, or it's with the way it was attached to the original structure. You have to pretty much destroy it to free it up. All you need is a little bit of thinking in the beginning to that first structure goes together with the intent of taking it apart. And that's where I think a lot of progress could be made immediately. There's materials everywhere that if you just look, you can find them. I don't worry about supply at all. I think that regardless of what city you're in, we're taking down a bridge right now in Charleston, South Carolina. And there's 27,000 tons of steel that are going to be produced by that bridge. And jobs like that are happening every day.
Over 60% of the world's energy goes into building, heating or cooling, or dealing with the construction waste of buildings. And that buildings themselves, just in terms of the amount of space of the planet's surface that they cover, actually have a big impact on the environment. I think that there is this growing awareness that we should be taking more care in how we build buildings and making sure that they have less of an impact on the environment, and that they're more efficient in terms of the energy use.
Adaptive reuse, we've been talking about that a great deal for decades now, and I think that's part of the sustainability story, is that you use what you have and where you have it. So whether it's an old building that's perfectly adaptable to a new use and lives on and creates a whole new environment for new uses, or whether you use the materials that are available to you in like the materials of the Big Dig, those are all really important to think about.
Anything's possible. Anything's possible. And you shouldn't disregard any possibility in thinking. And it makes sustainable architecture exciting. And that's, I think, the value.
I think we enjoy the fact that people are excited about the house, but I think it's more important that people get behind the idea behind the house and start looking at the problem we have with all the waste that we're creating on projects like this and come up with creative ways of reusing it. And since most of this construction is federally funded, I would think that the government would create a program, or could create a program, where that second use, which would be a permanent use, could be engineered into the job at the outset. And I think that our next move aside from additional construction projects, is to foster some sort of engineering study that will encourage the government to set up a program like that.
For more information on this series, go to pbs.org. To order the 6-part DVD of Design E2, call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS.